Progress. All right, I got it. All right, welcome to class 3. This is halfway through our discussion of Confucianism and Confucius and the Analects. For all those watching, not live streaming this, but nonetheless, at one point it will be streamed. This is the Analects. And today we are looking at, we're going to jump into talking about the primary concerns and the dimensions of Confucianism. This is sort of the skeleton of the whole entire system. I'm holding the two most important teacher tools. I bet you didn't see that coming. My laser pointer and my wand of time. But anyway, this helps me to talk about abstract concepts. So I always like to have them when I'm here. Anyway, so what I always like to do is to make sure that we just touch base on what we talked about last time. And what we talked about last time was Confucius and his very distant protege, okay, Mencius. What do you remember about Confucius and Mencius? Anything interesting that stuck out, that kind of stuck like lint, you know? Yeah, yes, Confucius and Mencius lived in two different eras. In fact, Mencius was the student of Confucius's grandson. I think that's what it was. Like very distant. So sometimes we think of Confucius and Mencius like we might think of other significant duos in religious history as like they traveled together, they did this, and every so often Confucius was like, wasn't that funny, Mencius? And no, he's not a sidekick. Mencius is his own dude, okay? And he adds to the Confucius system, and we'll find out that some of the stuff he adds gets a little bit twisted or has the capability of being twisted towards the dark side. Ah, Star Wars reference. Um, anyway, yeah, so they are two different eras. They represent two different sort of moments of Confucius history. What else about Confucius and Mencius, or not, or one or the other? It doesn't have to be both together. Yes, yeah, and Confucius he did want to help advocate for order out of chaos when you had the Warring States period going on in China, but he wouldn't have probably qualified himself as an evangelist because he himself was talking to people about humaneness and the praxis that comes out of that. Mencius has a system to promote, which is the distinction of evangelism, right? We think about Paul from the Second Testament, and in Paul's letters, Paul is advocating for a kind of a specific system. So he's an evangelist of sorts. Do you remember the discussion, not discussion, but the little poll about what the other evangelistic traditions are, religiously speaking? Mm-hmm. What's another one? Yeah, Islam. Yep. Yeah. And Christianity. Speaking of St. Paul. And Jesus also says, go teach, baptize, those words. Anyway, yeah, only three, and Confucianism is actually not inherently evangelistic. It's sort of contained in its own self. What else about Confucius and Mencius of interest? Yeah, yep, absolutely. Yep, his mother taught him everything, and he had a high regard for that. For me, I always love remembering that Confucius was someone who was of the people for the people. That is his orientation. Um, I do always marvel over religious, the tendencies of, historically, in religion, the tendencies of these great, wonderful minds being able to just sort of leave their family and go and try to do things. I find that's interesting. What? Yeah, but Jesus wasn't married and didn't have kids. All these other guys did. Yeah, some of them did, yeah. But yeah, I don't think it started with Jesus, because Jesus again is way after Confucius. Yeah. It depends on the structure of well, it depends on the structure of patriarchy, actually. This idea that there's this support system in some form at home, and then the ability of one person to leave. Nowadays, we don't find that, because we have demands that often present in ways that we need to incomes for a household or whatever. Daniel's not about to up and just leave, honey, I have to go evangelize everyone on traffic engineering and proper uses of roundabouts. He might want to do that, actually, from being in a car with him for the past 17 years. He might want to educate everyone about how to use a roundabout, but he would have to contend with a bunch of other things. So I always find it interesting, because Confucius literally left. This is where we see his inequality with women. Like, he was, I need to go do this thing, and there's no argument there. There's no, I always like to bring that stuff up, because we don't want to make heroes out of these humans. They're human beings, and they may have been brilliant. They may have been at the right place at the right time, saying great things, but they still had cracks and creaks in their orientation in society. No one is perfect. No one is perfect. And I say that because I have to do it anyway. In my own academic pursuits, I deal with a lot of really great thinkers, but also ones that have significant problems. And so just facing those head on is what I like to do. Anyway, what I'm going to do now, before we jump into our actual lecture on the dimensions and the primary concerns of Confucianism. No one's on Zoom, so in advance, sorry everyone watching later. Okay, it's a little bit less foggy. It looked a little bit crowded, like someone had put their thumb on the, looked clouded, like someone put their thumb on my camera. Anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hop over here to Zoom, and I'm going to show you the maps, and I'm going to hand them out too. I like to do everything in many different forms. So let's share this screen. And then I'm going to make it big. This is my favorite image of, hold on, I just think it's so kind of comical. I don't know. There's just something about this that doesn't make me think of Confucius, this image of Confucius. Anyway, that red line, if your vision is as bad as mine from a distance, this is probably not helping all that much, but don't fear. I have copies. Anyway, this is a map of the Confucius's travels. Remember how I was just talking about the fact that he was able to kind of up and leave? This is his travels. And then there's other maps also in here that are, of the China provinces in the 5th century. Another map of like sort of Confucius sort of made his way like kind of across the territories. And then there's the spread of Confucianism, which is at the very, very end. I'll show you that one too. But this one, you can see this red line is where he goes. He goes back, and he's traveling all around because he's trying to articulate this system so that these warring states can so the people can find some comfort in the midst of this tumult and chaos. So that top one just sort of shows you where he went and where he visited. And then and that's walking, maybe horses, right? He's not like he's getting on a train. Okay, he's committed. And then we have the 5th century map. If you flip to the second one, that's the 5th century map. This would have been what that Chinese region would have looked like during Confucius's time. So you see there's an imperial capital somewhere, yeah, Zhao. You'll see these, what's neat about this map is this map will be great to have alongside the Analects because he will reference locations, okay? And then the third map is another map that shows like where he started and then where he ended. Again, not great on the big screen there. If I could actually just have my screen up there, it would be significantly bigger. And then the last map shows just the breadth of how much Confucianism spread throughout China by the years 200 before the current era. So in about 300 years, that's how far it kind of went. So if you compare that to where Confucius is traveling, which is a smaller portion, the first map shows you where he traveled, and then you see how much further it kind of spread beyond just the localized territories where, so it had a significant, this just validates its significance and its importance within the, you know, the crux of Chinese culture. Okay, so you can see that it just has this physical influence. You can see the physical influence, okay? Now, at any point in time, as we're talking, specifically when we're in the text, and you want me to go to one of the maps, we can tab back, okay? You have that, so you can have it for your own, and you can keep those, and that way you have your own references. Okay, so anyway, so those are the 4 maps. I felt like that kind of gave us a really diverse visual for the different aspects of that moment, because as you know, in cartology, like maps are drawn from a perspective. Okay, in our family room, dining room, where the kids were homeschooling for the year 2020 and 2021, we had 2 world maps, just as you know, where my parents would have like art, I have maps. And there's a map that's the normal one that we're used to, and then there's one where it's inverted, where the southern hemisphere is on top, because the Earth is a globe, like it's a sphere, so there really isn't a top or a bottom. But anyway, it's neat to see everything from a different perspective. But maps are always drawn and articulated visually from a perspective. It's why sometimes you may find that on some maps purchased in America, the Northern American continent is just a little bit bigger, but it's not really. It's not that big. But anyway, but I digress. Okay, so remember that we're trying to anchor this in our postmodern context, and remember that some of the aspects of postmodernity are alienation and isolation, the subjectivity of almost all things, the potential for the subjectivity of all things, and that when it comes to, with the progress of post-enlightenment thinking through modernity into postmodernity, we get the subject, the I, becoming the determiner of all things. Okay, which is great. There's a lot of beauty in that. I won't slam postmodernity like some other thinkers will. I do think there's a lot of validity in that I can define myself. My name is Lauren. My pronouns are she and her, right? Like I can tell you how I identify in the world. My experiences matter, right? So all of that gets heightened in postmodernity. It's beautiful, okay? It's really, really beautiful. That space is really precious. Where it goes wrong is when we start to really isolate everything into the person. Everything, language, religious expression, you know, like religious expression. I have a great chapter that I want to find a way to copy for you from Dorothy Zuela, but it was talking about the church, and the way that she was talking about the church was in such non-postmodern concept, this community of people that shares in, not identically, but shares in this system to some degree, these concepts, these terms, these ideas that you share in together. And when you grieve, this community grieves with you. When you rejoice, this community rejoices with you. It is very solitary if you're going to take all of that and just locate it in your person. I mean, isn't it frustrating when you have really good news to share and you don't have anyone to share it with? recently I had that moment where I had to call a friend and interrupt her at work because I was like, I have to share this with someone and no one's home. But the church community becomes this, or like specifically in religion, the community of your worship place becomes this group of solidarity, people who are with you, who understand, who share in the same vision and the same hope. And that solidarity really starts to cultivate well. But if we isolate all of religion within ourselves, that I'm going to determine what my God is and what my religious language is and what works for me, then I essentially become a religion unto myself with no way to have that challenged. Because I need challenge. I need to come up. Nativity needs to come up against unity, and unity needs to come up against nativity, because it's in that relationship of difference where there is striking beauty. Nativity needs to come up against St. Matt's, another Episcopal church, right? Because it's different. And this all relates really deeply with Confucianism, as you'll see today, because Confucius is going to argue that the self doesn't exist apart from the fact that someone else is with you. I don't know I'm Lauren until I cultivate this idea that I have an identity apart from someone else. Specifically, when we look at the idea of childhood and like that first couple of years where that attachment bond with the primary caregiver, the birther, okay, that attachment is so strong that the child, the baby, does not see itself as separate from that person. They are one. And it's right around 2 to 3 where there starts to become all those terrible twos, right? Or then people say, I call them the terrific twos. And I'm like, it's just 2 and it's hard and it's beautiful. But like where that resistance, all those tantrums are coming up because the identity of the child is starting to percolate, okay? And then they start to see themselves like, oh, I'm my own person in comparison to this other person. Anyway, it's really fascinating. But Confucius's understanding of selfhood isn't that you have it within yourself, it's that it only exists as you are in relationship with other things, not strictly only humans. Confucianism has a really broad understanding of relationship. So it could be with other elements in the outdoors, but something that challenges you in terms of you are not that thing. You are not that thing, okay? I'm not a rock. So I must be something else, right? So once you just start entering into that conversation, you start to formulate this idea of who you are and what you are. So for Confucius, this self is really important. However, it's not apart from community. Again, another great way of addressing that alienation and isolation that does come within that hyper-emphasis on subjectivity, which becomes almost nearly an objectivity. And then once you put objectivity over subjectivity, it becomes a calcified mass. And it's hard to break out of, because if everyone's calcifying, hardening over in their little shells, who could break out? We need an intervention. We need an interruption, to quote Hegel. Just kidding. Hegel said a lot of things. I don't think he said that, but I'm just paraphrasing in a quotation status type thing. All right, I'm going to go to my outline. Any questions about, again, like I just want to ground this so it's real, so that Confucius can speak to us where we are. All right, so the great news is that primary concerns of Confucianism, I'm going to just leave that map up there, it'll give you something to look at, they're short. It's easy. The bigger part is when we start going into the dimensions of Confucianism. So number 1, off the bat, before I do this, any need for restroom breaks? Okay, great. I'm going with Jackie that she's speaking for all the J's. The T's are good. All right, so number 1 off the bat for Confucius, without a shadow of a doubt, everything you read from Confucius is going to be operating within this primary concern: humaneness or human-heartedness. I love that term, human-heartedness, okay? Because sometimes humaneness can maybe feel a little bit too abstract. What does that mean? Is it the emphasis on my intellect? Right? Does humaneness increase as we get smarter or more evolved intellectually or morally or whatever it is? Or is it located like in a warmer, fleshier region of the body? So I love that human-heartedness, because we always want to maintain, even when we're talking about people we might not necessarily love, right? Like, you know, those people that you kind of say, oh, I'm glad God loves them. You know, everyone has people that they don't get along with. That's why we've done so much work on personalities. So either Enneagram or Myers-Briggs test, you know, you can find out what personality, why someone doesn't get, oh, they're ISFPs. Oh, of course, because INTPs and ISFPs just don't get along that well, right? But anyway, there's always that person. So I always like to, no matter who it is, no matter how immoral I might consider them, I always try to make sure that their humanity remains intact. Because when we start stripping the humanity back to vilify someone, to make them less human, that makes us less human. So I love the idea of human-heartedness, because even if that heartedness is missing, there's still a humanity present that I can see, okay? And I think that corresponds well with what Confucius wants to do with the terminology of humaneness or human-heartedness. Human in harmony with nature and heaven. So human-heartedness is not just my relationship with Jackie or my relationship with Tim, but it's also my relationship with the world, okay? So for Confucius, and this is something important, so the yin and yang, again, more Taoism, but it's going to make its way known. So when it comes to human-heartedness, markers, there they are. We have to look at everything, and I'm just going to move this into the field of vision just so people can see that I'm drawing. Okay, so when it comes to human-heartedness as a qualifier of relationships, we want to think of it as, that's you, okay? But then you have all these, that's a beautiful bright blue, isn't it? I'm really happy with this color right now. And of course they can keep going, but you have all these nested concentric circles that are getting wider around you. So this next one might be family. This one might be friends. This one might be the state, your immediate surrounding, and community, right? This might be the broader idea of like the nation that you're in, but also maybe nature as well, like as in the outdoors, and then just the cosmos out here. Okay, so there's this, you have all these different concentric circles of relationships that vary in the way they look relationally speaking. So human-heartedness is not just with you and your family or you with your friends, but you and the cosmos. Okay, this human-heartedness, which I will put in a different color. Man, I am really messing myself up with moving this basket every which way. Red, unpredictable. So we're gonna just allow that to exist. That's human-heartedness. It's going to, its focus is all the way through. Okay, but do you see how the arrows intersect all those other relationships? If it was just a family, it would be a very truncated, whoop, right? But this whole, the whole view of human-heartedness has this trajectory of always going outward. Okay, so your concern is for everything. Not that it's your burden to fix everything, but you want to transform so that all of these relationships get better and better. It's not just transformation for yourself. Again, that would be what Luther calls the curved in state, that turned inness. It's really, it's not only just for the family, it actually will benefit the cosmos, the world, the universe. Like all your changes and your transformations will change. So we always have to keep this whole entire concept in mind, because we will get to the anthropocosmic dimension of, it's not anthropocentric, it's not cosmic centric, it's anthropocosmic idea of like our relationship with everything. Like everything, we participate with it. That's where that human heartedness comes into. All of these relationships are absolutely crucial for Confucianism. And this is where we start to see overlaps with maybe a humanism, a strong tendency towards humanism that we see manifest in some forms of atheism. Okay. Now remember, in the Confucius system, there's no technical divine figure that you're worshiping. So it's very humanist in structure. Humanism, the key to understanding or noticing wherever humanism may be rearing its head is when you hear not only the emphasis on human activity in the world to make things better, but specifically humans can change. That's the key of humanism. So we can credit that with Confucian thought. Which leads me to say that the other primary concern of Confucianism is you. It's the person, okay? But specifically personal transformation, okay? And it's not so that you can become super awesome and cool and everyone will like you. It's personal transformation so that everyone around you transforms as well. That little adjustment in that orientation is crucial, okay? What does it look like when someone transforms for themselves? Yeah, there can be you want to soothe that ego from being, upset at being deficient or something, right? Yeah. Yeah, but I would say that Confucius and Nietzsche wouldn't see eye to eye on that. Yeah. I know what I'm saying. I'm trying to highlight like well, no, I want to highlight the distinction between change for oneself and change that has this external trajectory. So when I was teaching high school students, I always knew they were, always dating one another. Anyway, there was always a couple, and it was easy because I would eventually, by the time I got to Confucianism, I had earned the right to tease just a little bit, So anyway, a couple would be in the classroom and I would, talk about something silly like, Jeannie really loves pink gummy bears. And Ainsley keeps taking all of the pink gummy bears from Jeannie. And Jeannie is so sick and tired of it that Jeannie tells Ainsley, if you don't stop doing this, we're through, right? And by this point, the class is kind of laughing because it's kind of like a ridiculous thing to maybe break up over, but it's also teenagers, so maybe not, right? So anyway, so the thing is that Ainsley now is faced with a choice. Change to try to keep the partner for themselves, or change just because that's what they need to do. There's a distinction there. If you change just to keep someone with you, I will stop eating those pink gummy bears. It's going to live for a short period of time because it's not a deep, real, subterranean change. It's a surface, it's an epidural change, right? It's not an epidural change, it's an epidermal change. Very different changes, right? An epidermal change is surface that you can kind of fake it and you don't ever quite make it. You know what I'm talking about? Like, and then it's like, for instance, anyone who's given up anything for Lent, how long does it last after Lent? No, what do you do when Easter shows up or on Sunday when the Lent rules don't hold? You kind of have all the chocolate that you want, right? Yeah, because it's a surface level. You're doing it just for a surface thing. But when you are faced with a crisis within yourself where it's the change is necessary. Yes, excellent example, John. Yes, that what they call rock bottom, right? Where you have lost everything. And in fact, there's an aspect of Christianity that plays along. Well, of course, because AA actually has the rock bottom mentality from the more Lutheran Protestant conception of low anthropology. You hit rock bottom, and there you are able to realize that you do not have control. And the change that comes out of that moment isn't just to maintain control over something, but is, I will die if I don't otherwise. And so it has this trajectory that has a little bit more fluidity, and oftentimes you see that change. And so when change is directed towards others in terms of, I want to be better for them, not to keep them, but because my better will make Jackie better, because I will feed into her and cause her to thrive, and then Jackie will cause Julie to thrive. You see what I'm saying? So in Confucianism, the change, that personal transformation has that orientation through relationship. These are crucial. It's never just you trying to keep everything for yourself, okay? So does that make sense? This is the time to ask questions. This is the key. So when we get into Ren and Li, what I want you to conceive in your head and in your heart is that Ren is that heart, okay? And the Li is the personal transformation that has an external trajectory, praxis, ethics, okay? And this is when we start talking about this Li, this praxis, this personal transformation that has external trajectory, therein is the Confucian way of heaven. Okay. Now, because we're dealing with circles, we're not dealing with lines or starting points and end points, we're dealing with circles. I want you to imagine also that even though my personal transformation has a trajectory this way, it simultaneously has a trajectory backwards. Okay? So as I'm transforming myself and impacting my relationships, I'm actually clearing a space behind me that leaves a little bit of heaven for someone else behind. So intergenerational. So just imagine that this concentric circle actually has an invisibility to it. So leaving heaven, the way of heaven, is clearing out. So my trajectory of my self-transformation is external, so it's clearing the path ahead. I'm clearing the path behind. I'm progressing in my relationship with my invisible society of ancestors, and then to whom I will be an ancestor. Does that make sense? It's a little bit more abstract, but that's the kind of fun part of Confucianism, because even though there's this claim that there's no afterlife or divine figure, I do think that the ancestors function sort of in that, fill in that space. Okay, so I'm going to move into the dimensions now. You ready? Put the car in neutral. Don't press on the gas. You're just going through the car wash. Don't put your hands outside the windows. First dimension is self as creative transformation. These are kind of in order and they're going to make sense. Okay? Learning for the sake of self-cultivation. Self-cultivation is an end and not merely a means to an end. You always want to be cultivating and working on yourself. You will not, if you're doing it right, you'll never end. You'll self-transform until the day that you die. Okay? When we make transformation or self-cultivation a means to an end, then we will cease to be transforming when we feel that we've achieved our goal. Case in point, you don't want that, right? Because that's stagnancy, right? That becomes stagnant. You become stagnant. You get stuck. People who work out. Okay, anyone here work out regularly? Okay, you know that you have to keep increasing something in order to not only maintain, but then go a little bit beyond. right? Because as your body gets stronger, it now takes a little bit more to then just necessarily maintain what you've earned. But then if you don't want to just peter out right at that speed or that pace or whatever it is, you need to go a little bit further. And so the same thing with self-transformation. You don't use self-transformation to gain to a certain level in life, then you will cease to be self-transforming. So for Confucius, that self-cultivation, that self-transformation is integral to what that humaneness is, and it's always and forever. If you want to maintain your human-heartedness, you want to maintain your self-transformation. And as people who live through the years of 2020 to 2022, how crucial is it to be as flexible as possible in order to maintain your human-heartedness? The past 2 years have demonstrated the Confucian demand of always transform. I have not seen language move that fast. Like, I will finally catch on to a term and I'll be using it right, and then I turn around and someone says, oh, we don't say that anymore. And I go, what do we say? Right? Or the willingness to be taught by people groups that haven't had the ability to explain themselves. The willingness to, even though someone looks a certain way, for me to withhold pronounal judgment until they tell me what they are. All of that, like, and then we all of that has been occurring in the past couple of years in full force, right? So like we have this full surge of this, the beauty of postmodernity rearing up its beautiful mane and everything, and it's demanded that we need to be nimble on our feet, and the best way to do that is just to hold on loosely to that which you know, which brings comfort, and allow the discomfort to move you into that self-transformative motion where you move. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. I tell my kids that all the time. They don't like doing things that are hard for them. And I say, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay for things to be uncomfortable. We don't like it. I think Confucius would love to see us press into that self-transformation creatively so that we can remain nimble as long as possible. And that expresses our human-heartedness. When we hold space for someone to let them tell us who they are, that's human-heartedness. When we demand that we get to step into the space and I'm going to tell you exactly who you are based off of what you're wearing and how long your hair is or what your features look like, that's not human-heartedness. So we have very relevant context for understanding the necessity of creative transformation. Any questions about that? So, and in all of it, we're always going to go back to this idea that you're not doing it to get more Black friends or LGBTQ friends so you can demonstrate to the world how great you are, because that will always fall short. That's an epidermal transformation. You want to be a real ally with people groups that are oppressed and are fighting for their liberation, then you need to relinquish that and actually embrace it, so that with the goal being, I want to be an ally for these people. Not so that I can get the cookie, the reward, okay, but so that I can actually participate in their liberation. We never will. And we have to always, I remember once when I was in a situation where I was being very oppressed because of my gender and my sex. And I was being withheld from performing tasks that I had a right to perform, but strictly because I was a woman. And it was a very, very difficult experience because it was so blatant. Other times it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I think that was, but then I just keep moving on. But this was just constant, day in and day out. And one of my colleagues, a Black liberation theologian, he said, you sit in this and let it sink in, because this is how you will identify with people like you. But I won't fully, because I'm not a Black man, right? So we don't walk in their shoes but we can certainly learn to walk in step with them and to watch what it is that they suffer and what they go through, for sure, for sure. Okay, so let me see here. Okay, so in Confucianism, which this is the part that I love, you do not ever say the words, "it is what it is." Okay, you don't say that because nothing needs to stay the same. So the status quo is out. Upholding traditions just to uphold traditions doesn't sit well with Confucianism. You know, it also doesn't sit well with Buddhism. Did you know that? Enlightenment enlightens. When it ceases to enlighten, it's no longer enlightenment. It's like that type of logic. But the same thing with Confucianism. It is because think about it. If the demand is on you to always be creatively self-transforming, what is status quo? Change. But change isn't status quo. It's paradox. Yes. Say more about that. How relate that to the status quo? Okay, right. So tell me if I'm understanding correctly when I say that human beings, no matter where they are held captive and are complicit in their systems, right? Like I am not, even though I may not believe in the status quo holding reign the way it doesn't mean that I don't also sometimes have to submit to it because of the demand. Is that what you're sort of highlighting? Not accepting the fact that you can't, can. Oh, okay, right. Okay, I see, yeah. So more of an internal orientation. So if you've been taught your whole entire life that you just obey, you don't do anything else, then the self-realization is probably going to be a little bit less. Yeah. Thus, so that's a really excellent point. And that's why it's creative self-transformation. So maybe even just whatever that is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. I'm just looking to see, because sometimes we have these conversations and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I don't need to say that or that. Yeah, so we are dynamic and not static, and learning is character building. So even if the levels of self-realization, self-actualization vary from person to person, there's still room. And as have you ever played that traffic game where you have to get the red car out? Traffic jam, traffic hour, traffic jam? It's such a great game. But I know, right? It's this game, it's like, it's by Think Logic. It's like one of those smart game toy companies. And it's this little grid, and you place these trucks and cars on the grid, and you have to get the red car out. And you have to do so by, sometimes you move the pink truck this way 3, and then you move it back 3, and then you move it forward 3, like sometimes there's trucks and cars that just sort of go back and forth because they have to stay in their little grooves. But anyway, self-transformation is kind of the same thing, right? But as we move, so think about if you're in a substance, and when you move, you create more space, right? So self-transformation is just this idea. So even if that space is confined with little self-actualization or the ability to self-actualize, you can still start carving out. It might look like smaller steps at first, and then maybe those steps get larger. But yeah, we're dynamic. Human beings are dynamic. So we highlight, in Confucianism and Confucius thought, we highlight the dynamicness of individuals. They're not static creatures. Again, like I said at the beginning, just because someone lied or cheated in Confucian thought it doesn't mean that they're always going to do that. There's always a possibility that they might not. And I love that possibility remains external. You hold that possibility for them. So And then, as I said, self is not found in isolation, but in companionship, others, nature, the world, etc. Okay, self-actualization and transformation through the sacralized conceptions of the things that make up the here and now. So this sacred, what is here and now? Sometimes in Western religious thought, we have this binary of sacred and secular. I think it's one of the most darndest things we've ever done in this like dichotomy between this is sacred and this is secular, because if sacred is the most important thing, then what is secular can kind of go by the wayside and down the drain, right? We can kind of, oh, well, when Jesus comes back, in Christian thought, when Jesus comes back, it's all going to be made new. So we can do whatever we want with this planet. That's caused some problems, right? So what I love collapsing the two categories, because I think the incarnation literally collapsed them before I got there. Right? And before Jesus, there's Confucius who's also collapsing it. We don't need this sacred secular. We just need to appreciate and value what we have materially right now is really important. You know, don't just coast through life numb, waiting for something better. Create heaven now. That's that way of heaven mentality. Okay, so emphasis on culture, on society, on nature, and the creative power of heaven sort of falls under that. That's dimension one, creative self-transformation, or the self as creative transformation. Okay. The second way of saying it is definitely more wedded to Confucius's thought of the self as creative transformation, that the self exists. You lose yourself when you cease to transform, because it's in that transformation always necessitates relationships. So, okay. Any questions or anything to add about that first dimension? It's the crucial one. Oh, right. Ooh. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 That's so beautiful. That is such a great, such a great story of what we're talking about, because even taking that a little bit further, that protection, that stereotype, that horse is never going to change, lets me off the hook from having to change. which is what was embedded in that comment about that risk and vulnerability of love and being hurt. Yeah, you might be hurt, but that's all part of that self-transformation. That's such a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. That is so neat. Everything is capable of change, even animals, especially, I was telling Liza today, like, a little bit of love goes a long way. So we have a dog associated with us somewhere, not in our house, but who's kind of like on the way out. And so we kind of thought it was going to be this week, but last night we went and visited this dog and we all gathered around it. And I anointed and, just we pet and talked. And then Daniel was telling me today that the dog today was like just a little bit more spunky and perky. So they're delaying the final, the transition into God, if you will, because there was this life. And so Liza, I was sharing that with Liza, and she was really, really excited. And I said, maybe just a little bit of love went like a long way. Animals change. They know the difference. Black Beauty was written for a reason. That book, have you read it? Oh my gosh. It's my favorite book still to this day. I read it as a little girl, as a horse girl who got put on all the bad horses. But you should read it. It's such a tearjerker, but it's written from the perspective of the horse. And there's good owners and it puts all the onus actually on us. But there's a moment in there that I think you would resonate with, you and Kathy. Oh my gosh, yes. Black Beauty, that's your homework. The second dimension is community as a necessary vehicle for human flourishing. You can't go it alone, you can't go it alone, you can't go it alone. Okay, if you're looking to go it alone, check out Lao Tzu and Taoism. That is very much a tradition and a philosophy that articulates the self in this individual autonomous component that can go off into the woods and seek eternal life. Okay, that is a valid interpretation, but for Confucianism, absolutely not. It's always going to be about the community is necessary and the concentric circles of what that community is. So you and your immediate family, and then your extended family, and then your friends, and then your social network, and then your, as it goes on and on and on. We do not come to know who we are by ourselves in isolation, but in relationship to others. Through communications, we learn ourselves through our relational names, through our feelings and thoughts and ideas, all public and personal, but not private. So think about it, okay? Most of us wear more than just our self hat, okay? I am Lauren, but I didn't give myself that name. My mom did. Oh, so I'm a daughter. I also have a daughter and 2 sons. That means I'm a mom, right? And so these names, these relational names aren't supposed to be cages in which we should feel bound, but help me to articulate. So last night I was talking at dinner. So I'm an Enneagram 5. If you know what the Enneagram is, I'm an Enneagram 5. Okay, you're a 4. Hey, that's my wing, but 5s and 4s actually communicate pretty well together. But anyway, 5s have a tendency of not asking for assistance or help. We just do things on our own. We're little isolated monads that even pull outside of ourselves and look at everyone like data points. Okay, I am watching you, picking up data that I need, okay? So one of the things that my Ennea thought every morning says, nearly every morning, is like, try asking for help today and see how it goes. Try being vulnerable. So I have employed these, even something simple like, I need so-and-so to chop up the onions and the lettuce. And then guess what? It doesn't happen. And I'm like, this is why I do everything myself, right? But I was articulating this at dinner, and I was talking to Daniel, my husband, and Jack, my son. I was saying, when I open up and I'm vulnerable and need help, it's often met with people not following through, and that hurts me. Jack goes, Mom, do I do that to you? And I said, you are my son. That is a totally different conversation. You shouldn't, like, I can't put that on you, like my relationship with you, but our relationships with each other determine what is to be expected. Jack should be able to make the mistake of not following through, right? He's my son. I should be the mature adult in the relationship. But when I'm talking to another adult, I want that equality of that give and take, right? So, but it was a perfect example to talk about how the relational names sort of put, not cages, but fence posts of what's appropriate or what's beneficial to the other person to engage with them, right? So as a mom, I engage with my kids in a way that's very specific to me as a mom. Some of that bleeds into me being a female priest, okay? But I don't pastorally care for my adult congregants the same way I maternally care for my kids, right? So all these relationships help us determine who we are. And as we find ourselves sort of in, like an octopus with all of our little tentacles, like in these different relationships, we kind of acquire those into us and they help us to define ourselves. I asked Jay last time, define yourself apart from where you were born, what your parents did, who you're married to, who your kids are, what you do for a living. And Jay said, I can't, right? Because all those things define ourselves. So we're never technically able to, or given the time or the space to define ourselves by ourselves, okay? Also, in conjunction with that is this notion that we hold to in the West, that I have this thing called my personal thoughts and feelings, my personal self-care, or my personal sins. They don't affect anyone else. Confucius would say, balderdash. No way. You're not that segregated. Your private actions have public ramifications. Okay? Like, we do not go home and actually close the door on society. That is a myth that we tell ourselves. Our homes are as political as our polis is our home, okay? So we have to just see these things as reaching into each other. So what practices, so basic idea of what you practice at home all by yourself, okay, will bleed into what you do in the public. So I tell my kids that all the time, like, practice being nice to your siblings, because that will help you be nice to other people in the world, right? Like, the way we treat people in the privacy of our home actually will bleed into our political posture in the world. And political, I mean not party, I just mean orientation in society, our praxis, okay? You can put on a good front. This is what happens all the times in situations of abuse in the myriad forms, either some form of domestic violence or parent-child violence, right? The parent, it goes unnoticed because the whole entire relationship out in public looks really good. But what happens in the private, and you think that you can keep the two distinct, but eventually what happens is that the two worlds merge and someone does something and it causes, it bleeds in. It will bleed in. So Confucius says there is no private feelings and thoughts that don't impact your public life, okay? And so he's really breaking down that orientation towards autonomy. Okay, we broaden ourselves to deepen our self-awareness for more fruitful community and relationality with other people. Okay, and this is something I think that we are getting better at as human beings in our context. The more we broaden ourselves, the deeper our relationships will get with others. The more we're comfortable in ourselves, in our environments, who we are, what our story is, what our history is, faults and all, the whole kit and caboodle, the more comfortable we are, the more that we actually have space-making capabilities for others, and they can enter in, and then we have the margins to actually allow them to tell us who they are. And therein we start to broaden, right? So you can kind of see that broadening of relationality taking place. And working well with that human-heartedness. Third dimension, nature as home. Humanity is not the center or measure of all things. The horrors. Okay, thus flourishing is not anthropological or anthropocentric. It's not just about us. Okay, I think that with the discussions around climate chaos and global warming and all that, we started to realize that our private actions at home actually have an impact on the global atmosphere and landscape, right? So humanity is not the center. Human flourishing is predicated on the delicate balance of anthropology and cosmology, anthropocosmic. That's what I was talking about. We have to see ourselves not the masters of our own little world, but as a part of a bigger macrocosm or something like that, like just something massive and huge. We are part of this. You are a part of the cosmos, okay? And so when we start to see ourselves in right relationship, we cultivate this idea that we are not on our own. It's not just about us. Nature provides sustenance and inspiration for life. Imagine if all the trees go away. Do you remember the bee scare? That was like right around, my kids were, it was like 2009, 2010, something around there, where the bees were dropping dead or they weren't going home. They still are. Okay, it's neat how we just like to move on to other things. Murder hornets. Oh, right, Roundup, right? That is a huge problem. And if people don't pay attention, then we lose bees. We're in for a whole lot of, my daughter likes to say, ants would be fine if we all passed off. But if ants pass off, we are all in a heap of trouble. So Liza likes to always point that out. Ants are the teeniest, tiniest little creatures, are really super important to us. The grandeur and generosity-induced awe of nature provides ultimate meaning for regular human life. Desire to live in balance and harmony with nature. The secular becomes sacred and the sacred becomes secular, this collapsing of the two. It's that, I think that essentially what point 3, dimension 3 is talking about is just that thing that you have when you are on the, on that, there's, there's those break off points on the mesa where you can go and you clear out of the trees and you can see. Yeah, there's that one, and there's other ones too, like there's this one rocky one that you can take up, but it's that awe. Okay, same thing when you're standing in front of the ocean, you're like, I am the smallest thing, right? The ocean is so big and so kind of awe-inspiring. So remembering where you are. Another thing is that even if you were to go try to find yourself by yourself, because that's sort of the language you use in the West for locating the self, figure out who you are. Even if you were to go up on a mountaintop and sit all by yourself, are you actually alone? We might be from an anthropocentric point of view, but if you switch it to anthropocosmic, no, because there's a mountain goat staring at you. Or you can get stared at by mountain goats when you're in Ouray as well, swimming laps. They will stand on their little perches and stare at you while you swim. But you're not alone, right? Because for Confucius, that whole natural world is living and breathing, is in relationship with you. So you can't go anywhere. Okay, and for him, spaceships weren't around, so don't make that argument right now. But even then, we could argue that we don't know what life forms are out there, right? So no matter where you go, you are in relationship to something that is asking you about yourself and asking you to change. Maybe it's going on a hike and stepping around the flower, or maybe it's wearing shoes that are light, or stepping in a way that the fauna don't all scurry off as you're moving, right? So even in nature, there's all these components that provide relational mediums for our creative self-transformation. All right, and the fourth dimension is heaven as the source of ultimate self-transformation. Do not confuse this with, I've made it to the goal. That doesn't happen. All major Confucian thinkers are religious because of intense feeling and seriousness of purpose, like other great religions. There's a reverence for life. There's a commitment to work. There's a dedication to ultimate self-transformation. The way of heaven is here and now, right at hand in our regular day-to-day. Okay, so there's always an opportunity. You're always in relationship with something or someone. The private and the public collapse, and the sacred and the secular collapse. And here you are embedded in all these different relationship circles where you can then proceed to have means by which you can self-transform. Again, remember that octopus imagery. You have all these hands and all these relationships. And so you can take on, you know how octopi change when they blend in? Same thing with you. You blend in and you can transform, self-transform, and then that self-transformation is always for another person in these concentric circles. Jay, I just saw that you're here. I just saw Jade pop on.
Yes, and I've been very quiet, haven't I?
I'll take a picture of the concentric circles and I'll send it to you. And then I just wanted you to know that all of the readings that, because we're going to break here in a moment, and then come back and do some text dialogue, all the hard copies are going to be for you in your mailbox.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so those are the 4 dimensions. We have self as creative transformation. Okay, we have community. Let me get the right wording for it. Community as a necessary vehicle for human flourishing. You will deteriorate if you try to go it alone. Make sure that you have your eye to community for true flourishing. And we'll get into more details of that later. 3rd dimension is nature as home. Let's not forsake our relationship with the world, the cosmos, and then the way of heaven. Which is a here and now, the collapsing of the sacred and the secular, the public and the private. And as we transform, we're having that dual trajectory out from all. As we transform, we're making this space called the way of heaven. It's pretty close to the idea of all the liberation work that we do now benefits the generations that come behind us, right? It is easier for me to stand in the front of this church because of the rascally women in the Episcopal Church that got ordained to the diaconate in the middle of night in the 70s, right? They did that, and I'm just gonna make that path wider, right? And then Liza is gonna come behind me and make that path wider until it's so wide there are no paths and everyone can just be, right? Anyway, that's the goal. Let's take a break, and then we'll look at some analects. You like our maps, Jay?
Yes, it's very helpful.
All these maps will be in your mailbox as well.
All right, yeah. I've actually been reading on it in between. We're here in Denver, Rebecca's
Yeah, exactly.
here for radiation.
Yeah. We're praying for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that's where that name came into my head, because I was thinking of your note because I was talking to Christy about it. Oh gosh. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh gosh. Yeah. Would you be comfortable with us putting it on our prayer list? You would be fine with that? Can I get you a piece of paper and you can write it down for me? Okay. That's so funny. I'm so glad you said that, because I was like, where did that name come from? It came somewhere recently. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's a last name. So, okay. Let me get a piece of here. Here, right? Oh. We won't need to put, we won't put too many details, but if you just put her name, and we'll put something, like a, skin cancer diagnosis, we'll just put something generic up. Great. God can sort it out. God is capable of figuring out who we're praying for. Yes. me just move this out of the way for now. All right. Great. Great. All right. Text analysis. Woo, woo. This is in book 5. Book 5, number 25. Okay, so I'm going to butcher every single name in here. Okay, I'm just getting that out there super clear. Okay, the master said, clever words, a plausible appearance, and excessive courtesy. Zhuo Ku Ming found them shameful, and I too find them shameful. Concealing resentment and befriending the person towards whom one feels resentful. Zhuo Ku Ming found this shameful, and I too find this shameful. What is the master saying? Yeah, that's why I did the do you want to look at the piece of paper I gave you? Yeah, and then if you have any notes in the margins, whatever. Yeah. Say that again. The charm of the ego. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. 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 Yes, absolutely. And I think that works really well with what you just said, that this ego satisfaction is that nuance between that self-transformation for transformation's sake and self-transformation for yourself's sake, right? Like what we were just talking about in the dimensions in terms of our own why that question, why are you doing this to get people to like you, right? That's making self-transformation as a means to an end, the end being getting people to like you, right? Are you so the first 3, clever words, plausible appearance, and excessive courtesy, are all means by which we might be appearing as oriented towards people, but it's not an orientation towards people. It's actually an orientation towards the self, that ego. It's like that that question that people who have the tendency to people please have to ask. Like, am I doing this for the person to legitimately make them happy, or am I doing it to make myself happy, or to make my world calmer, or to keep someone at a distance, right? That distinction that Julie was pointing out, that ego aspect, is crucial in this quotation. Concealing resentment and befriending the person towards whom one feels resentful is also shameful. Pretending like there's nothing wrong and just going along with it as if there isn't an issue is shameful for Confucius. Why? After what we just talked about, why would that be? That seems like recipe for like how to climb the corporate ladder, right? Like, frankly, concealing resentment and befriending the person, like that almost sounds like, love your enemies as yourself, right? Even though we should probably really reread that whole entire thing. But why, in light of what we learned today, why is concealing resentment and befriending the person with whom you have resentment, why is that shameful for Confucius? Yes. Yeah. What else? You still have resentment in your heart. It is. Does it help the relationship or hinder it? It's going to be a fake relationship, and you're really doing it just to keep things amicable. I think I said a couple of classes ago, may have been the first one, may have been the second one, but divorce in Confucianism isn't like a bad thing. It's like sometimes what you just need to do to make sure that the harmony, if you're concealing resentment, I can tell you right now, there is no harmony, right? Because you conceal one resentment and you conceal another, and you can, you keep that abacus just going, right? And then all of a sudden, what happens? You never, right? And it all comes out, and it's going to be the shattering. So clever words, a plausible appearance, and excessive courtesy. Zhuoku Ming found them shameful. I too find them shameful. Concealing resentment and befriending the person towards whom one feels resentful. Zhuoku Ming found this shameful, and I too find this shameful, Confucius says. Jay, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it just sounds so much like the classic conflict cycle, just like you said, where you blow up and you've got a whole list of things that where you've been wrong before.
Yeah.
I just feel like the shameful part of it is just that in that second tenet, when you talk so much about us being in relationship in our community and all, how we really can't, unless we're willing to own the relationship and be honest in it, we're not going to be successful in it either.
Yes, I love that he said to be honest in that relationship. That's part of creative self-transformation, or the self as creative transformation, is that honesty, because this will isolate you into a role where you can't transform out of it. Because as soon as you try to, that whole entire relationship has been built off of on shifting sand, right? It's a fake foundation. So yeah, that honesty is a crucial part, self-honesty and honesty with others. Not honesty in the sense of just being mean. Sometimes we sort of do that, but honesty in terms of causing the relationship to move forward and to transform. Okay. All right. You ready for number 20? This is from book 6. Book 6. I'm transforming my pages as we speak. All right. The master said, those who understand a thing are not equal to those who are fond of it, and those who are fond of it are not equal to those who delight in it. Confucius says, what is going on here? What's the tiers? What are the distinctions? Yeah, what's delight? How is delight and understanding different? Delighting and understanding, how are those two things different? Yes. Yes. Yeah, that human-heartedness. Yeah. Yeah. Today I was reading a book that's literally every day, but it was talking about the word to understand is to stand under, right? To stand under something, to figure, like to get it, to figure it out. But I think when you delight in something, it's not a placement under it, it's a placement alongside it or with it, and an enjoyment, that heartfelt thing, rather than that to stand under it, to understand it, but to actually participate in its joy for what it is, rather than to, so when you understand something, you take it into yourself, right? The Greek word for to read is anagnosko, which means to, it's this motion of like taking up into the person, like into your mind, like they're reading up. To knowledge up is literally the translation. I know upward. Okay, but it's understanding can still have an ownership, that you understand something. It doesn't mean necessarily that you appreciate it or whatever, but that you understand it. Delighting is going to allow it to exist still outside of you. And fondness, okay, is this medium of like the space. So Confucius is incorporating a movement in this saying. Okay, there's understanding, and then there's fondness, and then there's delight. Okay, maybe it's like camel, cow, and horse, or whatever it is Nietzsche talks about. But like, there's this movement, okay, of understanding. Sometimes you can understand something that you get to a fondness for it. And then there's a fondness for it that bleeds into delight. Okay, and these can be three different things. But there is an actual momentum that seems to be at play here, a transformation from understanding through fondness to delight. So don't stop at just understanding, in other words, Confucius says. Move towards delight. Just kidding. Does this resonate? Does 20 resonate with you personally in terms of those three distinctions that are being made? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, yeah, the studying of scripture is a great foundation point for those of us who do that, right? There's reading just to read, to check it off the list. There's reading just to acquire information, and there's reading to know more about the subject matter. So a fondness, I want to know more about this, but then there's that delight where this thing actually starts to inform you. Yeah. It's very Lutheran also, but that would make sense because Luther was inspired by Augustine. But this isn't a Luther class, though a little bit is, because it's a little bit my world right now. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Who adhered to like the traditional, like Augustine. All right, number 21. Jay, do you have anything to add to 20?
No, it sounded great, like my relationship with gardening.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay, so the first one was weeding, right? Weeding, and fondness is planting seeds, and delighting is taking the fruit. Okay, number 21. The master said, those who are better than average may talk about superior matters, but those who are worse than average may not talk about superior matters. My Western 21st century sensibilities are offended. What is he saying here? What did Confucius say here? Hmm. Oh, good point. Yeah. Right. Okay, so yeah, so we speak, so those two comments work together, right? So what Tim said and what John said, they work together. So we speak to people in ways that they can understand, right? So for so I don't think it has to do with intelligence, because remember, Confucius would never say that, yeah, yes, yeah, exactly. So the above average would be like, okay, my lingo when it comes to talking about theology of resistance or Martin Luther or Dorothy Zuela is going to be above average, right? And so I can talk about these things, but if I'm going to bring them down to a teaching level or bring them to a students, I need to find a way to communicate them so that you can then start partaking, because the more you partake in them, the more you'll be able to talk about the bigger stuff, right? And that's what I hear both of you communicating. Confidence in your knowledge. Yeah. Yeah. Talk about, talking about what you know, and then when you're teaching it, teach it in a way, communicate it in a way that other people can understand. It takes a village. Anything else? Jay, do you have anything to add? No. The nice thing about how you both read this reminds me of the value of listening. When someone else, I don't need to know everything. I can be really good at what I know, what I understand, and I can really press into that and be really good at that. But I think we, in that kind of autonomous, isolated, alienated, part of what's causing all of that is this, I can be the expert on everything. I can go to WebMD, I can Google this, I can Google that, I don't need to ask for help. But I think that we could share in each other's experiences better through listening. And I almost wonder if like the backside of this quotation is an emphasis on being able to listen. I always think of everything in like multiple dimensions. So there's always like I imagine sometimes standing behind a quote and looking at it, like there's space behind the quote too. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Human-heartedness again. Yeah. Meeting people where they're at, Jay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. I will not mess up this name. I think I can say it right. Fan Chi asked about wisdom. The master said to work hard at what is right for the people and to show reverence for ghosts and spirits so as to keep them at a distance may be called wisdom. He asked about humaneness. The master said, the humane man puts difficulties first and success in overcoming them second. This may be called humaneness. After what you've learned, why is that humaneness? What's going on here? Who's Fan Chi? Just kidding. We don't need to ask that question. It's moot. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Visible and invisible. Yeah. Yeah. And then what about, does the second part read differently too? Okay. So he's translating humaneness as goodness. Okay. That's sort of like an Aristotelian move. Who's a translator on that? Okay. So how is humaneness or goodness, how is that part of putting difficulties first and success in overcoming them second? Think about what you learned about self-transformation. Why would the difficulties be the first thing and not necessarily overcoming them? Maybe. Yeah. Especially if the difficulty is coming from a relationship, which to some extent they usually are. But even if we strip back the human element, so any difficulty, why would that present as being primary and thus the stronger part of humaneness? Right. Okay, another Aristotelian move. Yeah. Yeah. So why was putting the difficulty first, dealing with the difficulty, why is that first? Not overcoming it. We have to be very careful with our language talking about it. It's not about overcoming the difficulty that's first. That literally the overcoming is second. Yeah, like maybe it's the thing that challenges, that's the thing that's sort of rocking your conception of yourself. Like it's the confrontation, the challenge, the disruption, the interruption. Those all can present as difficulties, either in human form or an inhuman form. Maybe it's, an ideological confrontation or interruption, or it's a belief interruption or conflict, meeting someone in relationship. But yeah, it's that the not shying away. I think there's an aspect too where it's not side. What problem? Right? It's not moving around. You put the difficulty first, you walk through it. It's that experience of existing in the difficulty and not just overcoming it, because a part of overcoming it really could be finding another path around it rather than actually looking at it and facing it and calling it what it is and proceeding through it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can definitely get that. We can definitely get there from here. Yeah. And I love how he makes ghosts and spirits separate. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Jay, anything to add?
I read that second half kind of through the lens of the first half, I guess, to work hard at what is right for the people. And I just made me think the humane man, then in that example you used before about allyship.
Yes.
The fact that you're willing to get involved in the nitty gritty of allyship. You're not going to win and you're always going to fall short, but the winning is not the important part. It's the fact that you personally are invested in it.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for adding that. That just made that so much more vivid. It is 7:35, and I know some of us travel further than others. I'm literally like a mile and a half, at 1.53 miles from here. I know, because I walk it. So I want to release everyone, but before I go, are there any remaining questions or insights or comments? Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I love this. This has been so great. Jay, good to see you. Oh, wait, over here.
Great to be seen. Good to see you.
Good to be
See you
seen.
next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.